Say we left the best for last, but of course we had so many outstanding speakers. We'll just say that we left another outstanding speaker for last. It is my great pleasure to introduce Michael Jones, who is Google's Chief Technology Advocate. In that role, he's charged with advancing the technology to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Michael travels the globe to meet and speak with governments, business, partners, and customers in order to advance Google's mission and technology. He previously was Chief Technologist of Google Maps, Earth, and Local Search. He also, before its acquisition by Google, Michael was CTO of Keyhole Corporation, the company that developed the technology used today in Google Earth. There's a lot more here in this bio, but I think you'd much rather hear from him directly, so let's give a warm welcome to Michael Jones.
Well, that was nice. Thank you very much. My goal today is one, I know it's the end of the conference, so I'm not going to try to tell you new things that you should have heard the last few days. I'm not going to recap things you've already heard, but I want to encourage you to think bravely about what you've already heard. It's easy to listen to things and not hear them, not really hear what's being said. It's easy to hear what people say, but not really realize what they mean or what factors motivate them to say those things. But it's really special to really look beyond that and think, what's the best thing I can learn from what I've heard? What's the deepest insight I can get? And in fact, usually I try to think, what's the greatest challenge to what I already believed that I could justify based on what I heard today? And that's what I think of as thinking bravely. People don't do that. They just want to be agreed with, or else they want to go home. I'm hoping to just challenge you perhaps, but to say things that I think you'll think about on the plane or car, bus, train, whatever, wherever you go next. And that's my goal. So I have about half an hour, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about technology, not transistors, or not whether to invest in Facebook's IPO, not about business, but about what it means to be in the technology business, what technology means to people, not as a solution to all of life's problems, but what's different about technology as a business as opposed to, say, clean water as a business. Both are really important, but they're different in their nature, and they're very different in how society responds to them. So I'm going to talk about societal response. As your ministers, you're in charge of that, so I'm going to talk to you about that. So the first thing to think about, if we're going to be brave, is that when we talk about change, you're in Silicon Valley, you're at Stanford, you're at the home of change. You're probably old enough to remember these as cars and airplanes in 1962. That's 50 years ago. And I'd like you to think that things change all the time, but they don't change like in a crazy way all the time. Like there are always new kinds of chairs, but you can still sit in them. They fit your bottom. There's new kinds of showers, but you can still take a shower. Things change, but the important part is what doesn't change. Getting there doesn't change. It's safe, it doesn't change. Whatever it is, the important part is the non-changing part, usually. What changes, and what's important about change, is that it makes the non-changing part available to more people. Maybe it's easier to get remotely, or maybe it costs less, or maybe it's safer. It's the same good thing, like clean water, or good air, or good medicine, or maybe good Google searches, but it's more available because it's on the phone, instead of having to go to some office and type. So that's what's important about change, is to really look not beyond things are changing, but what does it mean that things are changing? And that's really important. So everything you've heard so far, it's not just what's new or what's possible, but what does that really mean? Why is it changing that way? Who is now available? Who's this available to that it wasn't available before? Okay. So unfortunately, most change isn't that easy. Now, in 1440, the man on the right, whose name was Gutenberg, invented something called the printing press. It's often thought of as the most important technological change. You could debate that. I'm sure everybody thinks their own invention is the most important technological change. But really, if you look at books, there's a huge impact on every human's different because of books from then until now. Now, there were books before then, but to make it, you had to copy it by hand. So it took 5 or 6 years to copy the book. Well, it better be an important book. So there were only a few books. They were very important ones, but there were only a few of them that were copied so laboriously. Maybe there were errors. Most people couldn't read them. You go to somebody who was educated, they had read a book. The dissemination of information, the sharing was just not possible because copying just wasn't really possible. Now, That was 1440. It took about 200 years for books to become illegal and to be regulated by ministers. And in the 1600s, this man on the left, his name is John Milton. He was a writer, popular at the time. And on the right is his pamphlet called Areopagitica, which was about, the basic thesis was, don't make me get approval to publish a book here in England. Let me publish the book. I'll put my name on the inside cover. That's why the author's name and publisher is there. And if it's a bad book, you can behead me then. But don't make me beg ahead of time. Just wait. You can track me down because my address is there, and then behead me. Okay, so he went to Parliament and argued for that, and that passed. And the reason that was a big argument was because there were these people in the French Revolution and other places that had done what are called pamphleteering. Just before the election or just before the whatever, they would print up these papers and say, oh, she's a bad queen, she should be beheaded. And she got beheaded. You know, it was like a bad thing. So they thought this irresponsible printing was the scourge of government. And so there were laws about responsible printing, which always made you go to the minister of printing before you could have a book published. And there were people that wanted to write books about things that the government didn't want to say. And so they did it secretly in the basement, and they got arrested for it. And so he said, look, let's just print them, and then let's figure it out. And his quote was really good. He said, look, has truth ever lost a fair fight? That's great. That's a really good thing. Has truth ever lost a fair fight? Well, no. So if you have faith in what you believe and what you're saying, either on the I'm the government and what you're saying is irresponsible, well, then it'll come out that it's irresponsible. Or if you're on the side of what they're doing is bad. The emperor has no clothes. It'll come out in the picture. He's standing there with no clothes on, right? So that's the truth will win. So John Milton said, well, let's just talk about the truth and see what happens. So I think that was a brave thing he did when he wasn't going blind and writing Paradise Lost by dictation. And there's another thing I want to talk about, involves ministers as well. Now, there was, in the 1830s, there was the invention and broad spread of the telegraph. It was basically the Victorian internet. And there's a book actually called The Victorian Internet. If you haven't read it, you should read that. And what it's about is fantastic. And I'll give you an example. So people invent the wireless telegraphy over about 50 years. Somebody finally makes a business out of it. And they start sending messages around. And then as soon as they did that, countries said, well, I need to get a cable to my office in the other capital. So they had a couple of international cables, buried sea cables. And then what happened was people would, there'd be events like boxing matches and football games and things. In the United States, people would bet on those, and the criminals would telegraph the score to their betting and gambling houses, and they'd change the odds. And they would make it really good, big odds to bet on the guy that's going to lose, because nobody knows it yet, it's not in the paper. And they were taking all this money with illegal gambling, or legal gambling, but illegally organized. It was the first commercial use of internet, basically. Was this illegal, deceitful crime. And so I think that hasn't changed, right? All those ads to buy Viagra from some place and, somewhere. It's the same kind of people use new technology. But what happened then, which is so lucky before you guys got here, is they decided to make the criminals go to jail, not the telegraph company. Okay? And that sounds like a wild idea, but imagine if Alexander Graham Bell and the phone company were responsible for everybody that says something naughty on the phone, right? Or lied to you about interest rates are low or good time to buy gold or whatever it is. What they do is they invest, they made the legal pain apply to the people that did bad things to other people. And they made the facilitators of the road not responsible for drunk driving, and they made the people who made the telegraph not responsible for bad telegraph messages. I like that idea. It's Google. I like that idea. If I was an ISP, I would like that idea. If I was a phone company, I'd like that. I don't know why it's so hard to keep that concept. It made a lot of sense in 1830. Okay? It still makes sense. So, in fact, I think at the bottom, that's the first telegraph message sent in the United States. That was, what hath God wrought? Now, this is 50 years later. That's the International Telegraph Network. So it was just like the internet. It's just like phones. People love to talk to people. They like to talk to people when they're washing clothes on the rock. You know, I'd like to talk to people when they're far on the moon. They call, you know, everybody likes to talk to people. So anything that lets people talk is popular. Talk to your friends, like Facebook, it's popular. You know, everybody loves to talk to people. So the world survived an unregulated telegraph network. I just point that out to you. Now, I talk about war. I can't talk to government people and I'll talk about war. I talk about a war that's going on now, though. My war involves a fight between a concept. There's something we don't understand in Silicon Valley called political truth, and something we all understand as children, like the ground truth. Like, well, how is it? And this third kind is called scientific truth. Now, there's a battle that's been going on for a long time about these kinds of truth. And we're going to think bravely, we should understand what kind of truth we're hearing when somebody tells us the truth. Okay? So, I mean, and I'm not attacking anybody. I'm just saying, you know, there's lots of kinds of truth, unfortunately. Now, there's only one kind of scientific truth. It's like, this is the best we know. We could be wrong, but all the measurements we've done indicate that this is consistent with what we can measure. That's scientific truth. Everybody that's a scientist says, if you say, but I can prove you wrong with my new machine, they'd say, great, I'll change the book. You know, that is, heroes of science are famous for finding a mistake of other people and proving it. They're celebrated for that. Okay, that's not what heroes of like employment are celebrated for. Like the boss, you're wrong and I can prove it, you know, or you know, the senator's wrong and I can prove it. You know, that is not how other parts of society work. You know, they're more on the political truth side. Like, well, we really can't talk about that right now. You know, so I deal with this all the time because I'm in the computer business involving information. Some information is good, you know, it's benign. Some of it's like maybe it's good information, it's truthful, but maybe it like makes somebody look bad. So saying the truth and makes somebody look bad, that person thinks it's bad truth. Everybody else thinks it's good truth. So, you know, it's one Google, one internet, one phone line, whatever, one telegraph. Then is that thing bad? What's the morality of truth? It turns out it's a very contentious warfare. And I'm not going to belabor that. I just point out to you that there's when I talk to these ministers, to presidents, kings, I said, well, what do you think, for example, I'll just make this an example. Don't take it personally if you're from one of these countries. If we all held hands and walked to the Simla line of control, and we had Pakistanis on one side and Indians on the other, would we know where to go? Like, is there a line that we would know to go to? And they said, oh, yeah, I know that. I said, now, do you know what line they think is on their map? Because I did Google Maps, so like, you know, I did this line battle all the time. Yeah, I know where their line is. How about your line? I know where your line is. I said, I draw all three lines. How do you feel about that? The ground truth line, their point of view, political truth line, and your point of view. I say all three of them. You click, it goes to their ambassadors filing for the International Court of Justice. What do you think? In one of those countries, that's a good idea. In one of those countries, it's a crime. But it's a minor crime. It's a misdemeanor. World's largest democracy. It's a misdemeanor, to tell the truth. On the other side of the border, the third side of the border, it's a very big country I'm not going to name. It's a felony. So you got the truth. Everybody agrees it's the truth. Saying it is either good, a little bit of a crime, or a really bad crime. Just to say the truth that all three countries have said. So that's political truth, okay? And that's not something that we understand at Stanford, at Silicon Valley, you know, technology companies. We're more the scientific truth kind. Now, I'll give you an example. This is really pretty. You know what this is, anybody? Extra credit? It's a graph. That's good. You know, so do I know you? Yes, you're human. You know, yes. Okay. What this is the United States radio frequency spectrum allocation graph. So for every policeman that needs to talk to somebody because he's getting shot at, or every hospital that needs to call in the rescue helicopter, there's a little box in there, and they stay in their box, they're good. And if they get out of their box, they go to jail or get arrested by the FCC or whatever it is. And there's a chart like that in every country, and there's the chart of charts held onto by the ITU. This chart of charts, it's a wallpaper like this with 220 of those on the walls. And that's their, like, you know, we are really big. Now, what's interesting about that is that, I know you're not all radio design experts, but I'll show you something. If you have a radio and somebody says, tune into this channel to hear your song or whatever, that channel is a frequency, right? But the radio doesn't listen to just that frequency. It listens to a bunch of frequencies, and the right one listens to really good, and the near close ones it kind of hears, and then it falls off. Like if you're listening to your friend, you hear people shouting in the background. Radios do that. And so to keep the shouting from interfering, they make the radios be far apart. Now, the truth is, what actually works in the radio only needs one exact frequency. Kind of like different colors of light have a different frequency. So there's the blue frequency and the green frequency. They're different. And if it's just the slightest bit different, it's a different color. You couldn't build a radio to do that. All of that could fit into what is thought of as one of those little boxes by making radios that are narrower and more selective. The entire worldwide fight by companies over, this is my frequency, I have a block on frequency, you can't broadcast here, the whole ITU frame, all that stuff, it's all like just because they started out with tubes and they didn't bother to make better radios and make it the law because the regulations made what you used to could do in 1920 the law. Companies built billion-dollar empires on those regulations and fighting off their little boxes. And now really good radios have no place in the commercial radio space. All the militaries use a different kind of radio they aren't like that. It's not like it's even hard to buy this stuff. You can't buy it for home because you have to use old-timey radios fought out by regulations because regulations tend to never change. So the reason technologists are afraid, in general, of you guys, I mean, you don't look mean, but the reason we fear you is if something needs to be regulated in your mind, you make a rule. And the rule is kind of like, well, there's a Model T Ford. I'm going to make a rule about the tires have to be 40 inches around or whatever it is, and then that's the case for all time. You can't make a smart car because the tires have to be that big around. And that sounds silly to you, but all the rules are like that. They don't have we'll do this until things seem like they ought to change, or we'll do this and look at it again in a couple of years. There's no laws like that. There are very few laws like that. They're more like, well, we designed it in 1908, and you still got to make your airplane that way. That's the way the laws are in most places. So technologists see these charts, and we think, the world fights over this, and the whole thing is a big joke. The scientific truth and the political truth on things like spectrum allocation are completely out of phase. They're completely at odds to each other. It's crazy. Aliens would come, they would just laugh at us. Okay, another topic I'm going to talk about, and this isn't it, so don't worry. There's a concept called peak oil. Have you heard of that? Okay. Now, some countries like that because they have more of the oil that's left, even if it's after peak oil. Some debate that it's peak oil. It's kind of like climate change. There's the scientific truth, and there's the political truth, right? You can have any point of view you like. I don't care. But the concept of peak oil is interesting. To forget the oil part of it, here's the concept. Ready? Peak telecoms. Okay. There will never be as many phones as there are today that do telephony. There are less today than there were yesterday. People are uninstalling real phones. People are buying mobile phones that use internet communication for all their backhaul. People beg to use their mobile phones to internet connections for phone calls, but it's illegal in some places because their ministers of telephony or whatever said you can't do it that way, okay? There would be almost no phones now if it was not held on by laws about phone regulation. I'm not against phone companies. I love phones. Phones are great. But Alexander Graham Bell took his stock money from his IPO of the phone company and started the National Geographic Society. So I admire that. But nonetheless, if I want to use my computer instead of my phone and it's a crime, think about the effect you're going to have on your grandchildren next time you look at a law, okay, and make it last for a long time. That's crazy. Now, I'm talking about another thing. I mentioned to you about change in the beginning and about, I showed you the old car, the new car, old plane, new plane. Now, in 1300s, 1320 or so, since you're politicians, I thought maybe I'd stick with things from, century-type examples. So in Italy and all around the Mediterranean, there was it was a shipping culture. You have wars out on the water, you move spices around and food and stuff. So getting there was really important, and the only tool was the compass and a rope with little knots in it, little triangles of leather. You lower it out, and the leather would pull the rope out of your hands, and you count the number of knots that go through your fingers in a second. That's the knots, That's why boats are called knots. So all the countries wanted to know, how do I get, say, from Genoa to Rome, or how do I get from Genoa to Frankfurt, so to speak? And so what they did was, they had this cool thing. They had all the captains, ship captains, and all the countries did this, had to keep a logbook. And they'd say, we started out on Monday morning, and we went at 200 degrees for 14 hours, and then we hit Addis Ababa, or whatever the other place was. And they'd bring that in their little book. And they'd go home, and the Ministry of Shipping, or maritime people, would say, well, if you leave here and you go that way, it looks like it's then about 400 miles till you get to that other place. And I put a dot there. They write down Naples or whatever it is. And they did that over time. And what happened was the Italians were able to take all those marks and figure out the coast of Italy perfectly. It's great. And it took them a few years. So when you think about things like Wikipedia and crowdsourcing, and you think, wow, these new computer guys have really figured out something amazing. I wonder if we could use it for anything real. And we understand that the military charts that were used by every country in the Mediterranean were crowdsourced from sea captains. Okay? And the sea captains didn't even know what was going on because it was the military captains got to use this stuff, and the everyday commercial captains provided the data. So it'd be like if FedEx trucks or delivery postmen wore little GPS devices and they mapped out your country for you. I'm getting a letter at my house that maps out something for the mapping agency. I don't know anything about it. Just like that. So that's been going on, for about 700 years. Works really well. It's not a new idea. It's tested, it's trusted. You get bad data, but you get a lot of data. Let me show you another example. This is the country of Pakistan, and this is a Google map. And we had this system at Google where we built these maps. We wanted to get the whole world, and we couldn't buy enough data to get the whole world. We had the money, fortunately, but we didn't have, there's nobody to give it to. Nobody had a map of Pitcairn Island or all these places that there were no maps. So what we did was we built a system called Mapmaker where you could go on your computer and you could see a satellite picture, and you could just draw with the computer on top of the road and say, well, that's Michael Street, and that's Smith Street, and that's Jones Street, and you could just type in all the names and everything. And what happened is people have mapped out 184 countries completely. It's fantastic because it's their country. They live there. They know what it's like. So this was Pakistan. And there's this little place that I never really noticed before. Osama bin Laden's house is on there, but nobody knew that. They were just mapping out the neighborhood. They mapped out his front yard and everything. That's the point. It's like somebody's walking around thinking, oh, I know that street. That's where the postman goes. That's that street, and there's this house. So everything's mapped out by local people. It means nothing to them. So then, for example, on Twitter, this is pretty cool. There's this guy. He said, hey, he runs the internet cafe. He said, hey, there's a helicopter here at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's really strange. Okay, this is great. It's just a local guy. And then a couple hours later, he says, uh-oh. So the thing is, when you get people to give you data, they get lots and lots of data. They don't know what it means. When it's all together, it means something pretty important. Maybe it's later, but it's really, really important. So there are so many examples. It's hard for me to give an example of this, but the world is increasingly a recorded place. Okay, either by personal action, people typing in, I'm at this restaurant and I'm ordering, or they're closed, or they're open, or the road is closed, it's open. Or it's like by cameras, people walking around with cameras everywhere. The world's increasingly a recorded place. That data is increasingly kept online. It doesn't get forgotten. So the world we live in is a recorded world. Now, you might pass laws about that, but it doesn't, I'll talk about that in a minute, but it doesn't really change the fact that it's a recorded world. You can make it illegal, but it's still recorded. A lot of things you can make illegal. People still do them. It's because you can't be everywhere. So people will talk more, and certain secrets are still secret while they're happening, but they're not necessarily secret later on. What they mean isn't clear later on. So I'll just leave it at that. It's just there's this house there. It was like somebody had mapped that. It's surreal. So the overall effect of this idea of a few billion people are watching is that basically there's power in that information that's so powerful. It's not like I give you a present and I wrap it in nice paper. You say, oh, a nice paper, but you rip it apart so you can get to the present. The information isn't like the paper. It's the present. It's the powerful thing. It's the weapon if you yield it like a weapon, like Arab Spring. In a sense, it's a weapon. If you use it like people in London, it's a terrorist or loser kind of criminal weapon. It's for good or bad. It's like everything. It's for good or bad. So what's important, and I want to talk to you about this, is that when government people look at something that can be good or bad, whether it's the Telegraph, or whether it's the internet, or whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is, they say, well, this could be bad, and I'm not supposed to let bad things happen. I'm supposed to make sure that good things happen over bad things. And what's interesting about things like this that don't need approval of anybody to happen is that when you try to slow them down and control them, people just kind of go around you. Okay, so like if you were saying, people drive too fast, I'll drive slower, they'll all slow down with me. Well, you know what they would do? They'd zoom up behind you, and they'd swerve around you, really, right? And cut in front of you and zoom off. You know, that's what they would really do. And that happens even at the scale of countries. And I wanted to alert you to that. So you can make any laws you want, enforce anything you like, have any values you want. That's totally great. What will happen is, for example, I went to Italy, and I went to a computer science department, spoke to all the students, and there were very few of them, computer science students. And it wasn't because I wasn't popular. There were all of the students. There just weren't that many. It was a huge university. I said, what's going on? They said, well, you know, the unions here don't allow things to be automated. So really, students know if they get a degree in computer science, they're going to have to go to another country to work. So only so many students want to go pay to study a career and then leave the country. And I thought, well, that's crazy. You know, it's just, the whole thing is crazy. Well, that's okay with me if that's how Italy wants to be. What it means is other countries will have automated factories, be more efficient, and Italy will have a bad economy. That's the Italian choice. They could have a happy Italian economy, but it won't be maybe a happy, wealthy economy, right? That's a choice. I mean, I don't mind that. You know, I mean, I make choices all the time like that. I don't steal things, so I have less things, but I'm not a thief. You know, so it's okay to make choices, but don't think that there's a protective barrier around you. You know, if you don't encourage intelligent people to do good things, they'll do them in Greece or Sweden or France or the US or something, right? Every time I see exchange students come here, I think, wow, that's great, but are they going to go home or not? I want them to stay and work, you know, hire them for Google or whatever. But if they go home, that's good. That's better for their country. So if they stay here because there's no job in their country, then all the good people who could have made those jobs have fled the country. It's like that's. So think about that when you think about laws that limit people's ability to share information. I would urge you to think that the truth never loses an honest fight. That's really important. You won't lose if the government you stand for is a good one. You won't lose. You might have some bruises, but you won't lose in the end. I mean, you'll be more proud of yourself. Okay, so, and pretty much to finish, I would remind you that there's a terrible danger in taking too much faith in political reality. Now, I'm not saying that, I mean, I help run a company, so I understand, you know, that there are times you don't talk about certain things, I understand that. But if you fool them, you're just dishonest. But if you fool yourself, you're dangerous, okay? So you know what I'm saying? So to know that what you're saying is necessary and somehow prudent at the moment or whatever, I can understand that for certain kinds of jobs or whatever. But if you say, and that's how it really is too, and I'm going to make all my decisions based on that, then you're like a walking time bomb. You know, it's dangerous. So I'd encourage you to think bravely, to really understand how things really work. Now, you may not agree with my ideas of how things really work. That's what I think. But there's something that's below the surface that, if you think about it, you'll know is really right. And those things will help you choose a good path, to a lasting path that lasts for decades, generations, millennia. And I would encourage you to do that. That's what we do in all our decisions at Google, and I hope you do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And well, it's time to close up this conference. I want to really extend, on behalf of the United States government, on behalf of Stanford, our great thanks to you. We challenged everybody at the beginning to be active participants, and I think we more than exceeded expectations. And we just got word, actually, that there have been more than 10,000 viewers of this event on Ustream over the past 3 days. And if people have seen the Twitter feeds outside, many, many more. So what we want to do is that we want to let you know that this conference is not just an endpoint, but that we are building. We are building towards Rio and beyond. We continue to need the help and the active participation of everyone here and everyone listening. We will be posting the notes from the breakout groups of the conference. We'll be posting our speaker bios as well and registrants. And we would encourage you, too, to send ideas for those groups that have built on ideas in the breakout groups, the Young Conference, or just in the corridor. Send them to USRio20conference@gmail.com. That's USRio20conference@gmail.com. We will be building this as we go towards Rio de Janeiro. We will be bringing your ideas, not only the ideas here, but the ideas we build on in the future. Again, thank you to all. Safe travels, and we look forward to seeing you down the road.